You are listening to the Financial Survival Network. I'm Kerry Lutz on 1230 WBZT. Happens so many times. Families are close, tight-knit. Then a parent passes on, and then the fun begins. Well, not the fun, the conflict, the anger, the resentment that was simmering beneath the surface, the hostility, and then the disposition of the property, the will. You find yourself in court, and the fights can go on for years and cost veritable fortunes. And Sandra Champlain is on with us now to talk about how you can avoid it, how she helped settle her family's disputes, and the way to avoid it, and the proper way to deal with grief when this happens to you. Sandra, welcome to the Financial Survival Network.
Oh, thank you, Kerry. I'm delighted to be here.
So you had this happen, this exact situation happen in your family. What exactly happened?
Well, I can tell you just a little bit about my history because the topic of grief and my book title are different, yet they draw a comparison. My book is titled We Don't Die, A Skeptic's Discovery of Life After Death. And back 15 years ago, I personally went through a fear of dying, and just for myself, kept quiet about it. I did some research, a lot of research. Is there any credible proof of life after death? And I found a whole world through science, through medicine, through some things that are so strange, but they're accurate. And so I rested my own fears. So great, that happened. I was never going to share it with anyone. Truthfully, I believed in the past, people that believed in that sort of thing were a little weird, so I didn't want to be labeled as friends, as crazy by my friends. And then in 2010, my dad got diagnosed with cancer. And I'm one of 4 siblings, and have always been reasonably close with my siblings, had an agreement that when mom or dad die, we wouldn't turn into one of those lunatic families that fight, which you're talking about in your intro. And so Dad got cancer, and over the course of 5 months, his health deteriorated, and he ended up dying May 11th, 2010. Now, in that time, I did not realize anything about the grieving process. We've heard about those families. I didn't realize that before someone dies, we can experience grief. It's called anticipatory grief. And grief causes this huge upheaval in relationships. And again, I didn't know a thing about grief to even recognize what was happening. So can I tell you a little bit about what was happening within my family?
Please do.
Thank you. We would have arguments as to what is the best care for my dad, what hospital he should be placed in, where he should be placed. He was living in Florida, and my siblings thought that he should spend his last months in Connecticut, which is where he had lived 25 years before. Somehow, and I don't know how this happened, I got labeled as the greedy sister. Dad would tell me that he wanted to stay in Florida, and my siblings told me, no, Dad wants to go to Connecticut. So I travel a lot, and on one of my trips, my siblings flew to Florida and physically moved my dad on a private airplane to Connecticut where they lived. And Dad had called me, I don't want to move, because of course his family's down there, his girlfriend, his friends, and things like that. And so something happened where they thought I was lying, I thought they were lying, and then ultimately Dad passed away in a beautiful hospital in Danbury, Connecticut, but he passed away on May 11th. And so that fighting just kept continuing. After his death, I got labeled, again, this is a close family, and I got labeled as the greedy one. And I'm thinking, why is that? You know, I spent the last 5 months of Dad's life by his side. I was the only single child, was married with family, as opposed to, well, isn't it great Sandra was so generous? You know, it turned into greed. I must have been there because I wanted more of his money. And just to fast forward, that fighting continued. Grief provides a whole bunch of anger. I'm sure you and your listeners have all lost someone we
sure.
love, tons of anger, tons of sadness. And over the course of that time, there was a fighting about Dad's belongings. There was a battle between Dad, my siblings, and my dad's girlfriend. Ended up costing my family, I think it was just over $60,000 in legal fees. And not only did I lose Dad, but I lost the relationships with my siblings. So it was after that that I was in such severe pain and sadness. And for you and your listeners, if you haven't lost somebody you love, it's easy to think that that will never happen to me. But unfortunately, our humanity as a whole, I don't think in our culture, knows about grief, what it is and what it can do. I don't want to take over your conversation. If you want to jump in anytime, Kerry.
No, hey, that's fine.
Okay.
I'm really fascinated by what you have to say here, Sandra, because it happens all the time. What you're describing is by no means unique, because look, you're a tight-knit family, and your father, the putative leader of the family, who is really the glue of the family, holds it together, and then you see that glue, the bond, becoming undone, and it's really frightening to the family. You think, and a lot of these fears go unspoken, and part of it is you don't communicate your fears, you don't communicate your worst fears, and then everybody's kind of left with resentments, because let's face it, families do have a lot of baggage if you're a normal family, and you're left just really, everybody's kind of internalized a lot of this baggage. So I guess you need some help. Everybody needs to talk to counselors, really, and you really need to learn how to deal with this grief, because like you said, the grieving process starts long before the final parting, right?
Right. And people don't see. This is what happens. Dad died, and I am normally this happy-go-lucky, peaceful person. It takes a lot to get me angry. I mean, a real lot. So not only did I have just severe anger, but depressed, sad. I'm not somebody who would contemplate suicide, but Kerry, honestly, I was in such a dark place that I can understand how someone else would. I mean, it's horrible. And so it was like the light bulb went off in my head that I thought, I wonder if this is all a part of grief. So we live in the modern society where we have the internet at our fingertips. And I started digging into the world of grief. And I found the 5 stages of grief. There is anger and depression and bargaining and different things, finally acceptance. But I wanted to know what would cause a good family like mine to turn into such monsters. And I was able to dig through, and I found out grief just doesn't happen when a loved one dies. If we go through a divorce or separation, grief happens. If we lose our financial status, grief happens. If we lose our home, if someone gets diagnosed with cancer or an illness, or our health changes, grief kicks in. And when, say, a loved one dies, 45% of sibling relationships end. When a couple goes through, if they have a loss of a child, say, 80% of the marriages will end in divorce. And I wanted to know, so I'm digging. I just have this instinct that something happens in our brain when we're grieving that would cause such good people to become, the only word I can use is monsters. You know what I'm talking about. The anger, the rage, the blame, calling somebody greedy, all of that. And what I found, I didn't expect to find, a brain that goes through a loss. And this might be a poor example, but if someone's addicted to drugs or alcohol and can no longer have that substance, they go through a withdrawal process. And it's an ugly process, right? They really want that thing, that substance. Well, when we love someone, whether it's a spouse, whether it's a pet, whether it's a parent, whether it's our job, or we're used to our finances the way they are, and then there's a loss, our brain has to readjust to that new reality. Just like a drug or alcohol dependent brain has to readjust to not having that substance. So while we're grieving, we are going through a withdrawal process. The brain has to readjust itself, and there's what's called a neurotransmitter called serotonin that we all have in our brain and in our system. And so when we grieve, we lose. A healthy brain has, say, 100% serotonin production. A grieving brain has about 10% serotonin production. Now, serotonin it impacts our mood. That's our feel-good neurotransmitter. So when we don't have it, that's when the anger comes in, or those sleepless nights. But serotonin is also, and this is the big aha moment I had, is responsible for our communication and our perception centers in our brain. So why this is important with families and fighting is because a grieving brain, it cannot properly store the information that it's receiving. So for an example, I had a conversation with my sister before Dad's passing. I said, my thoughts are X, Y, and Z. It's clear to me what I said. She repeated, so Sandra, what you're saying is this. And it was PDQ, something totally different, Kerry. So I thought, well, how come you can't get that? So it was about 5 times I repeated myself till she finally could repeat exactly what I had said verbatim. Because I knew she was going to go back and tell my brother and sister my words. So I said, okay, finally, she's got it. Well, she went back and she told my brother and sister PDQ, the wrong information. And so that, in my mind, I'm thinking, she's out to get me, she hates me, all of that. And what's really happening is a grieving brain has a terrible memory, cannot correctly store the information, cannot correctly communicate it. And that, like I said, the light bulb went off. What an aha moment that's what's happening here. That's why there's so many fighting. It's because we don't have compassion for each other. We don't understand the grieving process. We don't understand that grieving people are just, like I said, much like someone who is coming off alcohol or drugs. In our own experience, we think we're fine, but we're not.
Right.
So, as an example, one of my readers decided when her father died to insist that her siblings and she read my book, because I include in my book a chapter on grief, because I think it's so important that people understand it. And so those 4 siblings, what they wanted to do was they wanted to fight. And what they were able to do is to read and say, okay, it says this is how we're going to feel, and this is what we're going to do, and one of us is going to want this item, and one of us is going to want that, and how our emotions are tied in and our past is tied in. And so this family, there's no way of really predicting what would have happened.
Of course.
But compared to what happened with my siblings,
Sure.
they were able to peacefully support each other and go through the father's death, which is extremely painful. And we all need people. We all need people that understand what we're going
and we're
through.
going to talk more about that up next, Sandra. And we need to cover some other things in your book. Hi, it's Kerry Lutz. I recently decided to move my retirement account into physical precious metals to hedge against the coming times. If you want to move an existing retirement account into physical precious metals that you can hold in your hand, tax-free, there's no company that can do it more quickly and efficiently than Regal Assets. It took them just 24 hours to open my new IRA account, and all I had to do was fill out one simple form. The best part is that Regal Assets does all the work for you. They cover the setup and administrative costs for 2013. If you're interested in making the same move I did, call 855-678-6620, 855-678-6620. That's 855-678-6620, or visit them at regalassets.com. You'll be glad you did, and tell them Kerry sent you. And you're listening to the Financial Survival Network. I'm Kerry Lutz on 1230 WBZT. And we are back I'm Kerry Lutz, 1230 WBZT. We are talking to Sandra Champlain, and she's written an incredible book called We Don't Die. We were talking first about the grieving process, how it starts even before that loved one passes on. But Sandra, I want to talk to you, switch gears a little bit, talk about the title, We Don't Die, because something I personally believe, obviously you do too, because you wrote the book, but, you know, so much research has been done recently, of course, started off by Dr. Ray Moody 30 years ago, where people would have these near-death experiences where their hearts would stop and then they would be revived a number of minutes, even as much as a half hour, hour later, and they would recount these experiences of going down a tunnel and seeing a bright light, oftentimes seeing loved ones who had died many years before. And what set you down this path of recounting these types of experiences?
It all started years ago. My grandfather had died. I had lost some pets. And I had a lot of change going on in my life. I changed employment. I moved. And you know those moments when you look up at the stars, you think, what is it all about? Well, for some reason, it was what is it all about? And this huge fear came over me of what happens after I die. Do I disappear? Do I end? Is this it? And it was that fear that had me start looking for some answers.
Mm-hmm. So you started looking for answers, and I guess like me, you started reading some books on it, right?
Well, I did. Now, my subtitle is A Skeptic's Discovery of Life After Death. I never believed in psychics, mediums, astrology, any of that. I would go into a bookstore and look at all of the shelves filled with all that stuff. And I would think, these people need to get a life. You know, none of that's true. So to talk about near-death experiences and Dr. Raymond Moody, I was a believer that people would have near-death experiences because their brain was shutting down, and that white light was a normal part of what our brains do. I would have never believed that the near-death experience was what it was without doing some research into Dr. Kenring. And I don't know if you know about him.
Oh, sure.
But
yep.
he took Dr. Moody's experiment and his research one step further, and he interviewed hundreds and hundreds of people that have been blind since birth. And in their near-death experiences, they could see for the very first time those images of being able to hover in the operating room and see what clothes people were wearing and give details. These people were using eyes in a spiritual sense that they could never use on Earth. That opened me up to there's something more. I also had a wonderful experience seeing a medium named Doreen Virtue, very, very famous, talking about angels. And like I said, she's a medium. And when I saw her in the stage show, of course, I just went for entertainment. She would identify around people their deceased loved ones. She would give a name. She would say what they died of, whatever the message was to the person in the audience. And Kerry, it's so funny because my skeptical brain was saying, these people are plants. This isn't real.
I know that. I felt the same way.
Yeah.
Oftentimes.
There's going to be some hard sell at the end of the show for something. And there wasn't. So in my mind, you know, which is afraid of dying, I'm really keenly listening as to, wait a minute now, something's happening. And so very discreetly back in 2005, I took a course with Doreen Virtue. I flew out to Laguna Beach, California, and I charged my credit card money that I did not have because she said, if you're drawn to come to this weekend course, you will be somebody who can accurately tell the deceased people around others. And so in my mind, everything inside me is thinking, there's no way that's possible. But the fear was still so loud within me that I thought, why not give it a chance? And so if I can, it is a very cool thing that happened while I was out there that really had me say, this is real. Can I share that story?
Sure.
Well, when we arrived, there were about 20 of us in the class, and I imagine people wearing gypsy kind of wear, when they're talking to the angels and psychics and things. And so there was this group of 20 average-looking people. I thought, well, okay, not bad. And so Doreen said, we're going to show you how we do a medium reading, but we're not really going to do it yet. So we're going to just practice. So I thought, well, that's okay. So she says, everybody grab a partner, sit knee to knee, hold hands. And I picked this blonde woman that I've never seen before. And she says, I want you to close your eyes. And she says, the first time we're going to just imagine, we're going to make up someone. Again, she said, we're not really going to do it. So basically that took all the fear away. She says, I want you to imagine your hearts connecting, kind of like an invisible energy. And she says, I want you to just make up a person standing behind your partner. Have your eyes closed. So I can do that. And I can take the coaching. And so I close my eyes, and I'm holding this woman's hand. And she says, so you're going to invent a person. You're going to tell a story, who they are, whatever you want to describe them as, maybe what they died of. And there's usually some profound message that comes through. So, again, given that I could make this up, I had no problem doing the exercise. I held this woman's hands, and I made up that she had a grandfather on her mom's side named Jan, that he was a fisherman in Denmark, that he died of lung cancer, that he had blonde hair, and he had this real bad, like windburned skin from being on a boat too long. He had a big gap between his two front teeth. And there was a profound message that followed that he was supposed to give her mother. So I was proud, opened my eyes, thinking, okay, your turn. And there's just tears running down my partner's face. Her grandfather's name was Jan. He was a fisherman in Denmark. It's exactly what he looked like. And those words, her mother had never heard from her father before he had passed.
Oh, my God.
Exactly.
That's amazing. Ugh.
It's still, I have goosebumps right now as I'm telling you this story, because for the skeptics who thought there's no way, suddenly
incredible.
I was so eager. And I relate the whole life after death conversation to hundreds and hundreds of years ago. People thought the earth was flat. Mm-hmm. And there was no question. It was flat. There was no way around it. People died for it, saying it's flat.
Galileo, right?
Galileo spent his last days under house arrest because he knew it was round.
Yeah, the earth revolved around the sun. Oh, but it does, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so I think the conversation that we don't die is equal to the earth is round. It is. It may take, I think because we have the internet now, it won't take as long than 300 years to convince the earth's population. But it's a very real thing. And when we can live our life like we don't die, there's a whole bunch more courage to go after our dreams. Because if we can't die, let's just say we don't. Our bodies do, but this, whether you call it your soul, your personality, that which is us, truly us, the us that loves to laugh and loves to love, that us goes on. To know that means we can't fail in life.
Yeah.
So there's one woman who was in Appleton, Wisconsin, in her late 50s. Mm-hmm. Her husband had passed. She hadn't left her house in 5 months, and just in such deep grief. Well, thankfully, I think her daughter was the one who got my book for her. And not only is she out of the house, but she's taken a job. She's going out line dancing, and she's got her life back. Because, like I said, without the fear of dying, there's not the fear of living.
Sure. So makes a lot of sense. And we kind of have to wrap up here. So So, Sandra, I know I could talk to you all day. I really
know,
could, but one of those things we really need to wrap up. So we need to know your website and where we find your book.
Okay. Well, first thing is, my website is wedon'tdiebook.com, and there's some gifts there for your reader or your listeners if they should choose to accept them. And then my book, We Don't Die, A Skeptic's Discovery of Life After Death, is available at every bookstore, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and your local bookstores.
Mm-hmm. All right. Excellent. Well, hey, it's really been a pleasure. I'm getting to read your book right now, and we're going to have you back in a month after I've finished it, because it really covers a lot of relevant ground that I want to get into. And when we have you back on next month, we'll get much more into these concepts, because they've always intrigued me and they've always driven my life. So on that note, Sandra, financialsurvivalnetwork.com. Hey, whether your soul goes on or not, it definitely has everything to do with financial survival and things you need to know about. So on that note, Sandra, you be well. Great luck with the book. I know it'll do well, and we wish you the best.
Okay, thank you so much.
The show is brought to you by Audible.